Jennifer's story. The incessant patter of heavy rain on my office window put me in a trance. That morning, I found myself reflecting on my wonderful life. I smiled as I thought about my children, my loving husband of 21 years, Jason, and the amazing life we led. Blessed would be an understatement. We lived in a beautiful house on a 2-hectare plot. We could send our children to college, and we had health, money, and freedom. And our marriage was strong, even after all these years. My name is Jennifer, or Jen Bragg. Despite all these blessings, my upcoming 40th birthday has left me slightly depressed. For me, this was an important milestone in my fading youth. There were wrinkles on my face, and my delicious breasts were no longer firm. My skin showed signs of aging, and I gained a few pounds. Who am I kidding? My big breasts are saggy, and 9 kilograms is a lot of weight. I need to get back in shape. Despite it all, Jason, my husband, loved my body and everything about me. He constantly told me how sexy I was and how much he loved me, confirming it in bed. I really had no reason to doubt his feelings, but somehow I felt like I had let him down by not staying in shape like he did. Jason stayed in amazing shape, with muscular shoulders, strong arms, and great abs, thanks to all the exercises. He said going to the gym and staying in shape was simply something he was taught during his years in the Marines. He's still as handsome as ever, and I get jealous when I see another woman giving him glances or flirting with him while we're not home. I realized that my confidence was low, and I needed to do something before it was too late. Despite my insecurities, I loved my life, my husband, and my children. I love them with every fiber of my being, and I can't even explain how proud I am of them. Between Jason and my children, I had everything. So why am I doing this to Brian? What the hell got me into this? Was it because of my stupid ego? Is this a midlife crisis? Or am I just a cheating wife? I hate myself for allowing anxiety to take control of my thoughts and actions. It all started a few months ago when I saw a cute new guy in my office building. He had to be at least 10 years younger than me, and someone I could never imagine myself with. When I first saw him in the elevator, I found myself looking into his icy blue eyes. Against his blonde hair, his eyes really stood out, which caught my attention. He was big, I mean about 2 meters, and with a muscular body to match. Brian just oozed sex, and I found myself getting aroused just thinking about him. This was my first of many elevator encounters with Brian. We seemed to arrive at work at the same time and took the same elevator several times a week. Every morning I found myself hoping to see him again on the way to work. In fact, every morning I would touch up my makeup and check my outfit before getting out of the car, hoping that I would get lucky and ride with him again. It was stupid, I know, and I acted like a schoolgirl. But I haven't been so turned on by any man other than my husband since I got married. It turned into a game, and I even shared my excitement with Jason. Our sex life has improved, and I find that I have sex more often and feel much more satisfied when I think about Brian while Jason makes love to me. I didn't see the warning signs, and at my age there was no excuse for that. For the first month, Brian and I never spoke and just shared the same space, which was all I wanted at the time. Yes, we smiled and nodded in greeting after a while, but nothing else was supposed to happen. I knew that nothing would happen. After all, I was an older married woman, far from his level. Now I admit it. His smiles and thanks made me feel better. He made me feel a little wanted, and at 40 that's definitely what a girl needs, trust me. After I realized that I would see him more often, I started wearing sexier clothes to work. Shorter skirts, higher heels, and a little more makeup than usual. My wonderful husband Jason always complimented me on my appearance and told me how much he loved me every day before we left for work. I was lucky to have such a wonderful husband. It was in the second month that everything changed. On Wednesday, the day before the holiday, most of the building's employees took a long weekend off. That day, Brian and I took the elevator alone for the first time. While ascending to my floor, Brian pressed the stop button on the control panel, causing the elevator to abruptly stop ascending and sound an alarm. Without saying a word, he pulled me into his strong embrace and kissed me with the most passionate kiss I could ever remember. I felt tiny next to his strong body as I lowered my head to accept his kiss and wandering tongue. It was beautiful, sexy, and I didn't want it to end. But it all ended as quickly as it began. Without saying a word, he broke the kiss, released the elevator, and a second later the door opened on my floor. Not a word was spoken as I walked out and looked into those blue eyes again. He had my heart, and I wanted him to take me right then and there. I stared at him in shock until the doors closed and he drove away. I was horny as hell for the rest of the day. That was the only time we had any kind of connection. We still haven't talked and kissed just one time. For the next 2 weeks we drove as usual, as if nothing had happened. In fact, it became so strange to me that I had to wonder if I was imagining this event or if it actually happened. About a month after that kiss, we found ourselves in an elevator again. Standing behind me with 5 other people, he came up behind me and slid his hands under my skirt. I froze in shock as I felt his strong hands touching my body. The electricity and instant excitement told me that this was not a dream. Once again, I exited on my floor without saying a word and prayed that no one in our elevator would see what had just happened. These were the strangest and sexiest moments I have ever experienced. Brian made me want more, but thank God nothing happened because the thought of my husband rushed into my head again, and I remembered the wonderful lovemaking session we had last night. I love Jason so much that thinking about him saved me from myself. I felt guilty for enjoying Brian's advances and tried my best to be a faithful wife to Jason and put all thoughts of Brian out of my head. However, these interactions with Brian were different. It was not love, but only pure lust and desire that took over my thoughts. I had a hard time concentrating at my desk when I thought about Brian and how he made me feel so submissive. Somehow Brian had taken over a part of my mind and was creating chaos in my thoughts. Lust, not love. I had no feelings for this man, but I continued to fantasize about him for arousal. When I was next to him, nothing else existed. There was a connection and chemistry between us that I had never felt before. The attraction between us was obvious and dangerous at the same time. I knew I had to stay true to my vows, but the temptation was too strong, and I realized there might be trouble ahead. First contact. The following Tuesday morning, I continued to feel those butterflies in my stomach as I stood next to Brian as the elevator doors closed. However, today, something has changed. When the elevator started moving, Brian took my hand, put a note in it, and simply said, "Today." That's all. Just one word. Today. When the door opened, I stepped out of the elevator and headed to my office, holding a note that felt like 20,000 volts of electricity in my tingling hands. I closed the door to my office and put the note in the middle of the table, afraid to read what it said. I sat there for 15 minutes, shaking with fear, knowing that I was crossing a line that I shouldn't cross. There was a moment when I was about to throw the note in the trash, but curiosity got the better of me. Grasping the note carefully as if it were a poisonous snake, I turned it over and looked at the words on the paper. It was short and to the point. It only said, "Noon, 3553 Fifth Avenue, 12th floor, apartment 69. Looking at him, I remember what he said to me in the elevator a few minutes ago. Today, he just told me to be at his house at noon. Today. Is he serious? Does he just expect me to do what he says? Does he really think that I am that type of woman? Fuck it. Angry, I threw the note in the trash and started working on a new project. Unfortunately, I couldn't get Brian out of my head. I was furious and intrigued by this ridiculously attractive man. He was a mystery, but also very sexy. Just knowing that he found me desirable made me fall under his spell. It was 11 o'clock when I decided to go there with the intention of finding out what he was up to and putting an end to these games. I needed to explain that I was a married woman and not available. I looked up the address online and found that it was only a 5-minute walk from the office. So at 11:45, I left the office and headed towards his apartment, feeling confident and powerful. I was finally going to talk to this person and get my life back on track. However, as I walked up to the 12th floor of his building, my confidence began to fade and my sexual feelings began again, sneak into my thoughts. What did I do? Why did I go to a man's apartment in the middle of the day? The man I've been flirting with for the past 6 months. The man I kissed and let touch me in public? I must be the craziest woman in the world. These were my thoughts as I stood in front of his door to apartment number 69. Before I could change my mind and leave, the door opened and Brian stood there, shirtless, showing off his amazing body and wearing only tight gym shorts. His massive shoulders, large muscles, and six-pack abs immediately made me horny again. It was like a chapter from 50 Shades of Grey. He lived in a converted warehouse apartment, which was something out of the ordinary. I knew I shouldn't have been there, but the excitement was too much, and I enjoyed his flirtation and danger. I knew I could stop whenever I wanted, but I just needed to know more about this mystery man. When I entered his apartment, he pulled me into his arms and, without saying a word, kissed me just like in the elevator. But this time I kissed me back with more passion. We must have been kissing for several minutes. He forcefully pulled my blouse off and ordered me to take off my skirt. I was fascinated by him and obeyed him without hesitation. I didn't think about Jason or my family, only about his orders. As I stood in front of him in just my bra, pantyhose, and heels, he looked me up and down and then led me to his couch. Because the apartment was an old warehouse building, it had uncovered ceiling-to-floor windows. It felt like the whole world was watching us as I sat up and looked into his beautiful eyes. Brian dropped his shorts in one motion and stood naked before me. I gasped when I saw his size and girth, and somehow I was bewitched. And without thinking about my husband, marriage, or children, I was delighted with its beauty and power. Without any expression, he just looked at me and said, "Take off your underwear and let me look at you." And again, without thinking about anything other than this man, I undressed and stood naked in front of him, trying to cover myself with my hands. "No, put your hands down. Your body is beautiful, and I want to worship it before I take you, baby." I felt my body shake as he said those words. His eyes roamed over me with lust as my confidence grew. Taking off the rest of my clothes, he pulled me towards him and sat me astride his legs. As I closed my eyes and leaned my head back, Brian stood up and led me to the 14-foot ceiling-to-floor windows overlooking the city. He lowered me to the floor and turned me around so I was facing out, as he took me from behind, and we started having sex for everyone to see. I could have sworn that the people in the building across the street could see us doing this. It was so bad and exciting, and I didn't care who was watching or what they saw. He turned me into a slutty girl of easy virtue, and I enjoyed every second. After 5 minutes of hard sex, I felt the most intense pleasure I had ever experienced. When he finished having sex with me in front of the outside world, he lifted me up again. Brian was a big, strong man who apparently spent hours working out in the gym. He moved as if I were weightless and carried me to his bed, which was only a few feet from the window. Brian smiled, and then we started making love again for the second time. He was a machine, and a very powerful one at that. I never thought sex could be so intense. It wasn't love, it was just rough, powerful sex. Like I said, this man was a fuck machine. Powerful, big, fast, and not at all gentle. He used my body to satisfy his male urges that I foolishly believed came from my sexy body. Foolishly, I thought that it was my body that aroused this man, and I felt proud. I felt young again, and my confidence increased. Proud, I felt proud that I could still do it. In the near future, I would learn differently. Finally, we finished our powerful sex. He then got off me and told me that I needed to get back to work and that I could use the shower since he had everything a girl could need in the guest bathroom. It was our first time, exciting and powerful. Later that day, back at my desk, I was smiling and in a great mood, feeling blissful. That ended instantly when Jason called me and asked if I wanted to go out to dinner with him after work. "Hello, honey. I was thinking about you today and wanted to treat you to dinner after work. What does your schedule look like, baby?" Everything I felt suddenly turned into a feeling of guilt that I didn't even know existed. The man I loved, my husband, was on the phone inviting me to dinner. I didn't think about him all day, and suddenly tears welled up in my eyes, and I just said that I couldn't talk right now and that I'd call him back in an hour, and I hung up. My happiness turned to sadness, and I just sat and cried. No, I started crying when I thought about how I had betrayed my husband through a selfish act. I didn't know what to do. That night, I found myself showing special affection to Jason, and I had to restrain myself from revealing my guilt. I cuddled with him on the couch and made him feel good before we went to bed that night. This was completely out of character, as I only did this to him on special occasions or on his birthday. I couldn't let him make love to me after what I did that day, but I needed to give him as much love as possible. I prayed that this would be enough to take away the guilt I still felt. That night he held me tightly and thanked me for making him feel so special. Tears rolled down my face from the guilt that continued to gnaw at me as he held me close to him and drifted off to sleep. I hated myself for enjoying what I did and how good it was. I couldn't let that happen again, no matter how much I wanted more. This only happened once, and will never happen again. That's exactly what I was going to tell Brian the next morning, but he didn't say a word during our drive. And again, everything was as if nothing had happened and everything was the same as always. No communication, just a smile and a nod. I decided to put it out of my mind and treat it like it was a dream. Nothing happened for the rest of the week. Jason and I had a great weekend and spent most of it in bed. I needed love, and I wanted Jason to take me back and make me his woman again. Jason made tender love to me several times that weekend. I loved the way he made me feel wanted, loved, and appreciated. However, I wanted to ask him to take me hard, but I didn't have the courage to ask for it yet. After having sex with Brian, I discovered that I needed to be perceived that way again and would work on letting Jason know my desires. The following Tuesday, in an elevator packed with people, it happened again. Brian slipped the note into my hand again as I was exiting the elevator. Before I could make a scene, protest, or say anything else, the door closed and I was left alone again, holding another note. This time, the note again contained one word: noon. He wanted to repeat what happened last Tuesday, ordering me to be there at noon. No questions, no conversations. Just one word: noon. He treated me like a submissive, available girl and expected me to do what he said. I was angry as hell and paced around my office for over an hour, furious at what this man was doing to me. Brian was in my head and forcing me to do things I would never do, and as much as I hated him for it, it was strangely exhilarating. This excitement was what was missing in my life after raising kids and being married all these years. It was a game, and although I knew it was wrong, I needed the thrill. So, at noon, I was in front of apartment number 69, and the door opened again. Brian must have been watching the scene from the security camera and realized I was there when the door opened. Again, wearing only short shorts that showed off his massive body, he led me into the apartment and kissed me again. All my thoughts and anger evaporated, and my hormones took control of my brain again. There was no way to resist my desires, and I gave myself to this sexy man. It was a repeat of the events of the previous week. Sex with the window open, and then in his bed. But this time, when he put me to bed, I was blindfolded and voluntarily tied to his bed. As he kissed me and caressed me, he told me to just relax and let him take the lead. He carefully covered my eyes with a blindfold and then tied my hands and ankles to the silk ropes that were already lying on the bed. I was stunned and blinded as he began to kiss my body and tease me on a sexual level that I had never known before. It was particularly passionate sex. He then removed the blindfold and smiled evilly at me. Horror, excitement, anger, and happiness at the same time. It was a feeling that I will never be able to describe. A whirlwind of feelings raged through my body as I lay there, still tied up and helpless. Brian unceremoniously untied my ropes and told me it was time to shower and get back to work, and then he left. His words were powerful and commanding, and I found myself following his orders. I took a shower, touched up my makeup, got dressed, and went back to the office alone. I realized that I was delivering myself to him on demand, like going with a courier. I felt like an approachable girl and realized that this is exactly what I became. This has become a regular occurrence on Tuesdays. Driving up on Tuesday, I was waiting for this stupid note to fall into my hands. And every Tuesday, without exception, this happened. Our meetings in his apartment continued, and I became more and more dissolute and promiscuous. I started to really enjoy having sex in front of that open window, exposing myself and showing the world what an available girl I was. For some reason, being exposed like this was another new thrill. Brian continued to excite me with things I had never even thought of. He continued tying me up, but added things like spanking, rimming, and teasing reached new heights. I would react and do exactly what he told me without thinking, and thank him for the experience. I was his submissive, and I loved being used as a fuck toy. He was generous with his kisses and caresses and left me more satisfied than a girl could wish for. My self-esteem and self-confidence grew, until in the evenings I returned home to my real world. I was experiencing dramatic mixed feelings and had symptoms of becoming bipolar. One minute I'm happy, and the next minute I'm sad and angry. I hated myself, but now I was addicted to this hard sex with Brian and didn't know how to stop. I was confused, and Jason noticed that I was struggling. He asked almost every day if anything had happened. Is there anything he can do to help me, or am I not feeling well? It was obvious that my cheap fling was affecting my marriage, and I had to do something. I knew I had to stop it, but I didn't know how, because the desire for Brian was so strong. During my depression, I tried to convince myself that Brian was just a life-size dildo, nothing more. There was no love, no intimacy, just pure sex, which I knew was no excuse. But it helped relieve some of the guilt I continued to feel. Sunday. Jason and I had a wonderful weekend. We spent the day at the beach, walking along the shore, holding hands, kissing, and just loving each other like old times. That night we made love under the stars and the crashing waves. It was one of the most romantic nights of my life. I idolized these moments with Jason, the only man I had ever loved. Sunday night, after another fun day, we were cuddling on the couch, watching a Netflix movie, and I was in a state of bliss. My head rested on his chest, and I enjoyed this intimate time with him. It was late, and we were both ready to go to bed. As the film's credits rolled on the screen, Jason asked a question that rocked my world. I remember his words and how much it hurt me. As he held me close, stroking my back, kissing my neck, and biting my ear, he asked me, "Honey, who is Brian?" These words pierced my soul. "Honey, who is Brian?" Did he just say that? Oh my God. My body tensed, and I felt myself panicking as I tried to pull myself together. "What is this, honey? Who what?" I asked who Brian is. "I have no idea. What are you talking about?" "Jen, the last 2 times we made love, you screamed his name." "I was just curious about who you were fantasizing about," he said with a sad expression on his face. I felt my world crumble as I tried to come to my senses. I kissed him, lied to him, and told him I didn't know any Brian. Then I hugged him, told him how much I loved him, and carried him to bed. He wasn't in the mood for sex that night, which wasn't normal, but I wasn't going to take no for an answer as I kissed him and gave him a nice goodnight. He thanked me and went to bed. He didn't hug me or kiss me or tell me he loved me as we lay there falling asleep. My heart broke and tears flowed from my eyes at the thought of losing his love. I needed him to know that I loved him, and I held him close to me as we fell asleep. Unfortunately, I barely slept that night as I lay next to the man I loved, knowing that I had lied to him and betrayed his trust in the worst possible way. It was all on my conscience. He did nothing wrong and was a perfect husband. It was only my weakness that brought me to where I am today. I needed help and decided to call my older sister in the morning. She was the most sensible one in the family and the one I could trust. I knew she would be angry with me, but I needed her advice and help. I came to work late that Monday to avoid seeing Brian. I was in no shape to do anything at work and just carried out my duties. All I could think about were Jason's words last night. Who is Brian? These words and the fact that he might find out shocked me greatly. I called my sister Bryn and immediately broke down when she answered. It was clear that a phone call would not help, so we discussed the visit over a few days and I agreed. When I got home that evening, I told Jason that my sister Bryn had called and asked me to visit her for a few days, that I'm going to take a week off from work and visit her starting tomorrow. Jason told me that he understood and that I should go see her. The next morning, I called work and took a week off. As one of the executive managers, I had some discretion regarding time off. I drove 4 hours to my sister's house in Sarasota, and when she opened the door, I hugged her tightly. The hug turned into 10 minutes of tears and sobbing as she simply hugged me and led me to the living room couch. Bryn was an intelligent woman with 10 years of life experience, and I prayed that she would help me solve my problem. After I had cried, Bryn handed me a large glass of wine and sat quietly. There was no pressure on me to speak as she sat relaxed and stoic. I felt small and weak as I looked at her and said, "I had an affair and cheated on Jason." I immediately burst into another bout of sobbing, buried in my hands, and Bryn sat quietly and allowed me to put it out of my head. It seemed like an hour passed before she finally spoke. "Does Jason know?" "I don't think so. But he asked me who Brian was because apparently I was screaming his name during our 2 lovemaking sessions." "Wow, this is not good. You understand that Jason is not a stupid person. And if you did this, then he knows that something is going on. What's your plan?" "Bryn, I don't know. I'm lost and that's why I'm here. I need your help and wisdom. This is all wrong and I'm going crazy with guilt. I love Jason so much and I don't want to hurt him. And if he finds out, it will destroy him and our marriage. Jennifer, you know how I feel about cheating. You know David cheated on me and I destroyed him in the divorce because of it. What you're doing to Jason is unforgivable, and I'm not happy with you at all. Jason has been a wonderful father to your children, and everyone in the family loves him. Your deception will hurt more than just Jason. This will affect your children, our family, and your friends. What the hell were you thinking? I never intended to cheat on him. I love him very much and cannot lose him. This guy Brian seduced me and I foolishly fell for it. I'm getting older and my looks are fading. I haven't felt desired or sexy in a long time, but this guy just made me feel young again. I really tried to resist, but he had some kind of power over me, and I made the biggest mistake of my life. Listen to me, Jen. I'm sure you have your excuses, but honestly, you made a choice and decided to be unfaithful, and until you understand that and take full responsibility for your actions, you will not convince anyone that you regret cheating. How long does this last? I've been with him 6 times and it needs to stop, but I know that when I see him, he will take me again. I have no self-control when I'm around him. I can't explain it, and it makes me hate myself for being so weak. I spent the rest of the evening telling her all the details. She was shocked by the intensity of our affair and agreed with me that I was under sexual influence that needed to be freed. We agreed that breaking up quickly and confessing to Jason was the best strategy. It was a big risk, but an even bigger risk was not telling him. If Jason finds out before I tell him, he won't be able to forgive me. Bryn made it clear to me that he might not forgive me anyway, but confessing would at least give me a chance to save my marriage. My sister continued to explain that any self-respecting man who found out about this any other way would not put up with a cheating spouse. Before I went to bed, I called Jason and told him how much I loved him and that I would be home on Friday. I still didn't know how much he knew, so hearing him say he loved me before we hung up gave me some hope for our marriage. Bryn was still mad at me and couldn't understand how her little sister could have screwed up so badly, but she supported me and encouraged me to follow our plans to the end. The plan was for me to get through the weekend by showing Jason as much love as possible without going overboard to alert me to any changes. I would look for Brian on Monday and tell him it's over and make sure he knows to leave me alone. I would explain that it was a mistake and I would never be with him again. On the way home on Friday, I made a reservation at Jason's favorite Italian restaurant to treat him for the evening and show him how important he was to me. I returned home early in the afternoon and spent several hours getting ready. And in the evening, I wore his favorite red dress. After spending a week away from him, I realized how much I missed him and wanted him to forgive me. When I made my confession on Tuesday night after letting Brian know it was all a big mistake and closing that chapter of my life, I saw Jason's mouth drop open when he saw me standing in the doorway, in my dress and high heels, my makeup flawless. My plan tonight was to become a perfect wife and make him happy and appreciated. After a minute, he smiled and kissed me to welcome me back home. "You look amazing. What's the occasion, Jen?" "I missed you, honey. Being away from you all week made me realize how much I love you, and I wanted to surprise you. I made dinner reservations in an hour, so you need to get yourself cleaned up and ready in 30 minutes. Now go upstairs and get dressed for a fun night out." We had a wonderful night, and I felt a closeness that I loved and cherished. The owner was flirting with Jason, and I tried to let them both know that I was his wife when I took his hand. We had a good laugh and a great dinner. After dinner, we went to the Velvet Room across the street for some dancing and some after-dinner drinks. Jason danced with me all night, and I felt happy and confident that I would never lose this man. We kissed and touched each other all evening, and I couldn't wait to drag him back into our bed and make love all night long. I needed my husband to want me and make me his again. To my sadness, Jason got a stomachache on the way home, apologized, and said sex would have to wait. At home, he spent time going back and forth to the toilet and said it would be better if he slept in the guest room, as he didn't want to keep me up all night running to the toilet. I really wanted him tonight, but of course I understood and slept alone, thinking about my life and how I would tell Jason about Brian. I couldn't believe my luck. Jason was sick all weekend, and of course there was no sex. If I didn't know him better, I'd think he was avoiding me, but I know him too well, and the poor guy must have had a terrible weekend. Arriving at the office an hour early, I waited in the lobby for Brian to show up to tell him the news and end our affair. Unfortunately, my bad luck seemed to continue because he didn't show up that morning, and I ended up having to drive to my office, meaning I'd have to wait another day. After so many weeks, I still knew nothing about this man. I didn't even know where he worked or what his last name was. When I thought about all this, I realized that I must be crazy. How could I become so stupid and frivolous? This was not who I was, and I did not like this woman. On Tuesday morning, Brian actually showed up, and I caught him before we got to the elevator. "Brian, we need to stop what we were doing. I made a big mistake, and I can't do this to my husband. I love him too much, and I won't cheat on him again. I admit that I enjoyed our time, but it's over, and it will never happen again. Let's just remain friends and acquaintances." "No, this won't happen. You will come to my house at noon as usual, and we will discuss this." "Brian, no. Right now it's over. You won't have any problems finding other women who would kill to be with you. Not with me. I'm a married woman, and it's over." He took out his phone and said, "Unless you want me to send this to your wonderful husband, you will be at my house at noon, at 12:05. If you're not there, I'll make sure he gets this video along with some photos. I'm sure he'd be delighted to see his faithful, cheating wife in action. Don't you think?" I gasped when I watched the video on his phone. It was a video of me having sex with Brian. I trembled with fear and anger and looked at him in disbelief. "You bastard! Did you videotape me? How could you?" "I have a lot of videos with you, and as far as I understand, you are mine until I say otherwise. Be there at noon and we can discuss this further. Now I need to get to my office." At noon, full of anger, I was at his door. But this time when he opened it, I did not go inside. I told him I wanted to talk in the hallway, and that's when he grabbed my arm and pulled me into the apartment. He started kissing me again, but I didn't kiss back. This pissed him off, and he roughly threw me onto the sofa and wanted me to give him pleasure. This time I disobeyed him, which earned me a hard slap that sent me to the floor as he stood over me. I knew I was in trouble and didn't know what to do. I could try to fight him, but he would hurt me and still take me, or I could just give up, do it one last time, and leave with just a slap on the wrist. My face really hurt a lot, and now I would have to explain the bruises he had undoubtedly left for everyone to see. Things didn't go as planned. It was the hardest thing I've done, and I cried doing the things he expected. When he picked me up at the window, I felt tears running down my face, and I hated myself for getting involved with this psychopath. I didn't try to resist when he tied me up and put a blindfold on me, because I knew that in a few minutes it would all be over, and then I would run back to my office. I continued to cry, feeling him moving on the bed. I knew what would happen next, and just prayed to my God to save me. Then I remembered something falling heavily on me, and then nothing. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital room with Jason sitting next to me and holding my hand. 50 Shades of Grey, Jason even. After all this, I cannot express the grief that her actions caused me. Until that day, I thought we had 21 years of a wonderful marriage. Jennifer was my soulmate, best friend, lover, confident woman, and wife. She was everything to me, and I idolized her and thanked the universe for bringing us together. Jen gave me 2 wonderful children, Mark and Connie. They are both in college and on their way to bright futures. It seems that my bright future with Jennifer has faded, turning into a faint light on the horizon. I'm still trying to work through my confusion and shock with my therapist, the only person I trust and who was with me when I left the service. My job in the military kept me busy, and Claudia was a blessing and probably saved me from committing suicide during those dark times. The orders I followed and the lives I took left me with severe PTSD, but with her help, I overcame my problems and started a wonderful life with Jen. The older and wiser Claudia was surprised when I showed up in her office. It was a bittersweet reunion as we reminisced about the past and shared the pain of my current situation. I needed her help to control my anger and get through this painful period in my life. Even under our confidentiality agreement, I didn't tell Claudia some of the things I did. Let me take a break. With the kids in college, Jen and I had the freedom to make love anytime we wanted, and we were both active. I was 44 years old, and Jen was about to celebrate her 40th birthday. For some reason, this birthday was a big one for her, and it affected her mood. To me, she was still the sexiest woman in the world, and I loved every inch of her body. She complained about the extra weight she had gained, her sagging breasts, and her aging face. I tried my best to reassure her that she was getting more beautiful as she got older, and that I loved her very much. But I realized, too late, that women need more than compliments from their husbands. Well, it turned out that it took some new guy at work who could make her feel young and alive again, not her faithful husband. The new guy was able to do what I failed at. He gave her back her youth. One night in bed, I learned his name in the most painful way. It was during passionate lovemaking, during which Jen was enjoying herself, that she closes her eyes, loses control, and screams. I've always been proud of the fact that I can still do this to her after all these years. However, that night, when she was at the peak of her pleasure, I clearly heard her cry out a name that was unfamiliar to me. My eyes opened wide and I felt a knife in my back as I heard her sexily moan, "Yes, Brian." I'm not stupid, and I immediately realized that there was another man in bed with us, not physically, but mentally. A man I didn't know was now part of her life. It hurt, and I was jealous, but I didn't know the facts and was unable to react. I kept silent about what I heard, finished our session. I cleaned myself up and fell asleep in each other's arms. Of course, I didn't fall asleep as I lay there for the next 3 hours thinking about that single statement. I tried to convince myself that I had misunderstood, but I pushed the thought aside when I remembered how clearly she had said his name. Then I thought that he was just a man she had made up. Maybe an actor or some famous guy. I had no idea and struggled with my thoughts all night. The next day in my office, I decided to follow my inner feelings, which have never let me down. One of my witty friends used to own a security company with its own staff of investigators. I met him for lunch and discussed my problem. He asked me a few questions about her work and activities, saying that he would look into everything for me and would just try to keep things as normal as possible so as not to make her suspicious. On the way home, I reflected on what I had started and wondered if it was the right thing. Why didn't I just ask Jen about this? I figured she would deny it or make up some excuse and I would never know. There were no signs of anything at the time. So why did I become suspicious just because of that? I couldn't answer my own question, but over the years and through my training, I had learned to follow my gut instincts, and they told me to find out more about this Brian. My instincts helped me survive the most dangerous times in the Army. This saved the lives of me and my colleagues several times. One example was in Fallujah, Iraq, during a house-to-house search. The four of us were entering a building in formation, when suddenly this feeling took over my body, telling me of imminent danger. I ordered my men to stop and exit through the doorway back to our truck. Less than 30 seconds after they left the hotel grounds, the entire building exploded, sending debris flying 100 feet away. We would all have died immediately if we had not come out. There were 3 more similar incidents, and after that, the team never questioned my instincts. Those same feelings were now returning and I had no way to deny them. Sure enough, a week later, Jimmy J., a former Marine friend of mine, called me and told me about a guy named Brian Simmons, who works in the same building as my wife. They followed Brian to his office and watched the two flirt in the elevator, but nothing else for now. They were going to continue monitoring for a week to see if anything came up and to make sure everything was fine at my home. At home, I really tried to keep my sanity and act like a loving husband, but I noticed that Jen was becoming sullen. Happy one minute, angry the next. The best way I can describe her personality at the time was bipolar. It was clear that something was wrong, and I tried to figure out what was bothering her, but she would get angry or simply not respond. I left her alone and tried to just be there for her like always. We still made love, but at times, I felt that her thoughts were somewhere far away. This was another sign that my suspicions might be correct. That weekend, I met with Jay, and he said they had some hints that something might be wrong and gave me a voice-activated recording device. He asked me to hide it in her purse before she left for work next week. On Monday, I put the recorder in her purse, safely hidden. But that day, she changed her purse and did not take the recorder. That night we made love, and I gave her everything I had to remind her how much I loved her and wanted to believe that I was wrong in my suspicions. Once again, I outdid myself and gave her pleasure. Unfortunately, I heard her call for Brian again, with a quiet, barely audible moan. I struggled and did a great job as an actor, as we cuddled and slept that night. I had better luck when I installed the recorder the next day, Tuesday, which turned out to be the exact day of her betrayal. Using a voice-activated digital voice recorder in her purse, they got all the information they needed. After picking up the device while she was in the shower, I called Jay, met him that evening for a beer, and gave him the recorder. He said he would have information for me the next day. On Thursday afternoon, Jay called me and confirmed that my wife was, in fact, a cheater. I learned his name, where he lived, and when they met. Listening to their love-making sessions was harder than my most dangerous times in Iraq. Feelings of pain, insult, and betrayal were new to me and increased my desire for revenge. After listening to the recording for the 8th time, I realized that there was almost no conversation, but only the sounds of sex with some instructions, almost commands, from Brian to my wife. It seemed unreal. What kind of romance was this in which the lovers did not speak? Looking back, the last few weeks had been great until Monday night when she called Brian's name again. It's time to put an end to all this. So now that I knew the truth, I planned to say his name tonight to see how she would react. That evening, after listening to the recording, I once again demonstrated my acting skills. I was a loving husband as we had a nice dinner and watched a movie on Netflix. When the movie ended, we cuddled on the couch. I kissed her lovingly, nibbled her ear, and rubbed her large breasts, all the while trying to get her to relax and feel my love. She told me she loved me, and then she laid her head on my chest and moaned softly. That's when I asked this question. Jen, "Who is Brian?" I heard her gasp softly and nervously replied, "What do you mean?" Simple question. "Who is Brian?" I asked calmly, lovingly stroking her long hair. "I don't know, baby." "Why are you asking me this?" "Because the last 2 times we made love, you screamed his name. I'd just like to know who you're fantasizing about, that's all." Suddenly, I felt her tense in my arms and tried to come to my senses. I didn't expect an answer, and she never gave one, other than to say, "I must have misunderstood." She didn't know any Brian, and she's sorry, I thought that. She told me how much she loved me and had never loved anyone else. She did her best to convince me that it was a misunderstanding. I told her that I loved her and that everything was fine, but I was just curious and hoped that she would share her feelings or a fantasy, if one existed. She assured me that there was no one else. It broke my heart to realize that she had willingly lied to me for the first time in my memory. When she said she didn't know Brian, I wanted to shake her until she confessed, but I calmed myself and decided to wait until I was done with my planning before getting into any confrontation. That night, after this conversation, she wanted to make love. But after listening to the tape and her lies, love-making or any sexual contact was out of the question. There was no way I was going to share my love with a woman who betrayed me and broke my trust. It's time to experience the pain. The next day, I tried my best to stay in character and not give away the fact that I knew about her affair. I did a brilliant job of acting normal except for not making love that week. I told her that I had cluster headaches, which is not uncommon for me, and that I needed to reduce my activity until it passed. This helped me avoid any sexual activity for a few days. Missing were the kisses, loving compliments, and hugs we used to share on a daily basis, replaced by my acting skills. Jen told me about her plans to visit her sister for a few days next week, which was perfect because I could do some reconnaissance and get things moving. She was gone for most of the week, and with her gone, I finalized my plan of action. Now it would become a game of waiting for the right moment. We had all the information we needed about Brian Simmons. We knew his schedule. On Mondays and Wednesdays, he goes to the gym on the second floor of their office building during his lunch break. On Tuesdays, he had lunchtime sex with my wife, and on Thursdays, he had lunchtime sex with Maria Sanchez, another woman from the office building. As a commercial realtor, I knew of an abandoned building 3 blocks from his apartment that was slated for demolition, and it turned out to be the perfect location for my plan. From my sniper's nest, I could clearly see his window, which was only 133 meters away from me. Wind wouldn't be a factor with all those tall buildings between us, and the shot would be easy. Brian's old warehouse building had windows that must have been 30 years old, and those glass windows wouldn't have been a problem for my 300 Win Mag ammo. Heck, I hit targets 5 times farther in the wind. By some accounts, I left the service with the highest sniper kill rate in the country. Because of the risk of retaliation from foreign governments, my identity was never revealed, and my military records were sealed by order of Congress. I was an unknown hero in our country. I was happy to be unknown, as I had become dissatisfied with what I had done in the Army and did not want any bad publicity, even if it was for a good cause. Taking the life of another person is something you can never get out of your mind, but with the right therapy, you can learn to cope with it. This murder, however, would not bother me one bit because it is personal. The destruction of this predator would be easy to justify in my lifetime. My plan was simple. Brian, the seducer, will pay for his sins. My wife would have been there to witness and feel some of my pain. On Thursday, I sat in the nest and watched my target through the telescopic sight, which was having sex with Maria. Everything was planned and arranged for the following Tuesday, when my wife was scheduled to have her weekly sex session with Brian. What I didn't know until recently was that Jen was planning to break up with Brian on Tuesday. Would it matter? Would I change my plans? No. He had to pay for defiling my wife and destroying my 21-year marriage to my childhood sweetheart, and the only woman I had ever truly loved. Tuesday. Before sunrise on that fateful Tuesday, before the city woke up, I set up my Blazer R93, which was an unregistered souvenir from my time in the service. on the 13th floor of the abandoned building where my sniper's nest had been prepared. I also placed the old bike in a closet on the 2nd floor to use when I went away. After rehearsing my plan for the 10th time, I mentally prepared myself for the next stage of my plan. At 8 a.m., I was sitting at my desk in an office 3 miles away, drinking coffee with my workmates. I tried to control my nerves by looking at my watch, and at 10:40, I left my cell phone in my desk drawer, walked out the back door of the office, and walked the 3 miles to the building, arriving there at exactly 11:30. My plan was to get back by 1 p.m. and make sure everyone in the office knew I was there to confirm my alibi. 10 minutes before noon, I was ready. My scope was adjusted to the desired range and ready for action. As noon approached, I watched the apartment through the scope and then felt a pain in my heart when I saw my wife enter the apartment. I watched as he roughly pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was the first thing I saw as a feeling of fear and loss began to wash over me. I was confused when she pushed him away and it looked like they were arguing. Then I saw him put her on her knees. I was close to losing my composure when I saw him hit her in the face. After a few minutes, he dragged her to the window and pressed her naked body against the glass, just as he had done with Maria. I saw tears on her face as I zoomed in through the scope. What I saw was not the image of a happy, cheating spouse. It was more brutal and brutal than I imagined. There was no love here, which is what I expected. All I saw was Jennifer's compliance. I had a clear view of Brian through the scope as he picked her up at the window, but there was a risk of hitting Jen, so I waited patiently. I aimed the crosshairs back at the bed, where I assumed the action would soon take place. What I saw next shocked me to my core, as I watched in horror as my wife allowed him to tie her up. Who was this woman? She actually lives a double life, and I was in the dark. Was she into rough sex and bondage? After all these years, how could I not know her deepest desires? Watching what was happening, I aimed the sight at the target and began to wait for the exact moment, which came about 5 minutes later. I watched as he tied her up, laid her on the bed, and then walked around her for a few minutes. Then the time came. As he climbed on top of her, I noticed that he suddenly stopped moving. He seemed to be waiting for something. I wasn't sure, but that was my last thought. It was at that moment that my finger touched the trigger and the projectile flew out of the rifle barrel, covering the distance to the target in a split second. As I watched through the scope, I saw his head snap to the side and then saw his massive body fall limply onto my wife. I could only imagine what she was thinking at that moment, tied up, blindfolded, helpless, under the weight of this large man who had blood running all over his face. I wanted to stay and watch, but time was now of the essence in my plan. Quickly disassembling the Blazer 93 into 3 small pieces, I placed them in my backpack and looked around the room for any possible clues. I took off my latex gloves, put the shell casing in my pocket, and checked the room one more time, closing the window before heading down the stairs to my exit. I took the bike out of the closet and, on my way back to the office, threw the 3 separate parts into different parts of the river, along with the cartridge case. The backpack went into the dumpster, and 12 minutes later, I was back in my office. I made sure everyone in the office saw me and made a few calls from my phone as soon as I got back. It wasn't a reliable alibi, but I figured it would be enough in case I was ever questioned. Consequences. Hospital. The hospital called at 1:45 p.m., and I got to the hospital within 15 minutes, ran into her room and saw 2 police officers at her door. Concentrating, I walked up to the room and started to walk in on my wife when they stopped me. "Who are you?" "I'm Jason Bragg, her husband. Let me through," I said in a firm voice. "First, we want to ask you a few questions." "I don't care what you want. I'm going to see my wife." I walked up to her and took her hand when she woke up from her sleep. "Honey, are you okay? What's happened?" I asked. "Where I am, what's happened, and why are the police here? These are good questions. I was hoping you could tell me. So you don't know why you're here?" I remember the nurse was talking to someone, and I heard her say that I passed out from lack of oxygen. That's all what I know. I kissed her and told her that I would find out and be right back. After I calmed her down, I went outside to talk to the police. I approached them and apologized for my abruptness, but explained that I was worried about my wife, and they understood. Guys, can you tell me what's going on? What happened, and why are the police outside my wife's room? Mr. Bragg, there was a murder today, and your wife was in the room with the victim. Oh my God! Someone was killed and my wife was there? Who? Why? I'm really confused, guys. Give me something. Mr. Bragg, did you know that your wife was having an affair with a certain Brian Simmons? Using all my acting skills, I stood there with my mouth open in shock. I didn't say a word and just collapsed into one of the chairs in the hall. Mr. Bragg, are you all right? No, I'm not fine. You are sure? Yes, we found them together when he was killed. What you're saying is that my wife had an affair with this Brian Simmons guy, and he was killed today while they were together. Did I understand correctly? Yes, sir. Do you think she had something to do with his death? So that's why you're here? No. We believe that she is also a victim, and she is lucky to still be alive. She was in bad condition when she was brought here. Then why are you here? We are investigating a murder and would like to ask you a few questions. Where have you been today? Well, I was in my office until I got a call from the hospital. Why are you asking me this? Do you think I have anything to do with this? No, it's just a standard procedure. Talk to your spouse. So, you were in your office. Are there any witnesses who can say you were there all day? I'm sure there are, but I'm not going to answer any more questions until I get full information. Maybe then, but not now. I'm too upset right now. I returned to the room, sat on the bed, and took her hand. As soon as she felt my hand, her eyes opened and she looked at me in confusion. I kissed her tenderly and spoke. Welcome back, honey. You keep falling asleep. Are you feeling well? Do you have any pain? She shook her head and squeezed my hand tightly. I still loved her, but I hated what she had set in motion. We sat quietly as I prepared myself for what was coming next. Before I could ask her about Brian, a new detective walked in, as if he owned the place and wanted to ask some questions. Without preamble or any medical manners, this detective tried to take the initiative into his own hands. Mrs. Bragg, do you remember what happened today? She was upset by these questions and answered him sharply. No, I don't remember. Why does everyone keep asking me this question? What's happening? His intrusion and questions occurred while I was trying to talk to my wife. This detective was too aggressive and upset Jen. I immediately took the initiative, stood up to my full height, and spoke in an authoritative voice. Sir, my wife has just recovered from an injury. I suggest you give her some time before you begin your interrogation if you want our cooperation. If not, I'll ask you to leave or arrest her for something. But based on your aggressive questioning and behavior, I don't think we'll be answering any questions without our attorney present. He quickly changed his approach and tried to be my friend, explaining that he just needed answers to some questions to help find the killer. I told him in a stern voice to either be patient and give her some time, or he wouldn't get any answers. The nurse watched in shock at my assertiveness, because most people simply obey law enforcement without question. I wasn't one of those people. After he left the room, I saw my wife smiling and proud that her man was protecting her. After the room was empty and I was alone with my wife, I asked her questions that would change our lives forever. Jen, can you tell me what happened? She closed her eyes and lay there, trying to remember, but there was nothing there. The last thing I remember was holding you close to me in bed last night. The nurse said that I was still in shock and that with time my memory would return. That's when I dropped the bomb on her. Jen, when I was just talking to the cops in the lobby, they just told me that you were having an affair with a man named Brian Simmons. And today, while you were with him, he was killed. I'm not sure what happened to you yet, but for some reason you couldn't breathe. You lost consciousness and almost suffocated from lack of oxygen. Luckily, someone called and said they heard screams coming from the apartment. Their call probably saved your life. That's all I have now. This is true? Did you have an affair with Brian Simmons? So that's why you scream his name when we make love? I asked, and real tears flowed down my face. pain, and panic were written on her face. Seeing me cry for the first time in our entire marriage, she came to her senses and realized what she had done. She turned away from me and began to sob and shake violently. I grabbed her and held her close, letting her cry. I held her in my arms and spoke into her ear as she rocked back and forth in my arms. I loved you, Jen. You've given me 21 wonderful years, and I'm sorry if I wasn't enough for you. I understand and will let you leave me without a fight. I'm so sorry that I wasn't the man you needed. This caused more sobs and screams as she hugged me even tighter. No, Jason, I love you, only you. Please don't leave me, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Without another word, I left the room when the crying finally stopped. I heard her calling me as I walked away from her, knowing that I knew about her affair and the fear that she had lost me forever. Later, the same day after leaving the hospital, I called Bryn and told her that her sister was in the hospital and she needed somewhere to stay. I told her what the police had told me and that it might be a good idea if she could live with her for a while. Bryn, you need to come and pick up your sister. Is she in the hospital and will she need somewhere to stay? Jason, is she okay? What's happened? All I heard was that she was with her lover today when he was killed. She had some kind of injury, but everything is fine. They'll keep her under observation overnight, but she'll need somewhere to stay until I figure things out. I was hoping you could come and pick her up. If not, I will come up with other measures, but I think she will need your support. Why can't you let her come home, Jason? You are a good person, and I know you love her. I really loved her, you're right. Did you hear me when I said she was with her lover? Bryn, she cheated on me. She lied and cheated on me, and I can't be around her. I know her, and after she lost her lover and her husband on the same day, this will be too much for her. Jason, you need to know the whole story. Listen, I'll be leaving soon, and I'll be there by 8 o'clock this evening, and I'll take her home tomorrow. Can I stay at your place tonight so we can talk? Of course. See you in the evening. Drive carefully. I went home and poured myself a tall glass of elixir to calm my nerves and tried to become human again. The last 24 hours have been toxic and taxing on my nerves, and it's time to calm down and pull myself together. This didn't last long as I opened the evening paper I bought at the gas station on the way home. When Bryn arrived at 7 p.m., I was finishing my third glass of whiskey. After we said hello, I pointed to the newspaper on the coffee table. The latest news about today's murder was published right there, in living color, with crime scene photos on the front page of our town newspaper. Kirby Williams, a local reporter, heard the distress call on a police scanner radio and was there taking photos when police arrived on the scene. He took some good photos before he was taken outside. He thought he had taken a photo for a sensation and hurried back to the office with a great story that he hoped would make it into that evening's edition. Apparently, there was little news that day, and the mysterious murder was the talk of the town. The photographs showed Brian's large body leaning over a woman whose face was unrecognizable and covered in blood. The story featured a torrid love affair, a revenge killing, and an unknown assailant. Brian was identified as the victim, but the mystery woman was not yet known. Kirby continued to follow the story, and the next day recognized the name of the woman in the photo. The next week, to my horror, everyone in our town learned that my wife was the mystery woman. Jen was the adulteress, and I, by extension, the town cuckold, who was now a suspect and being questioned by the police. After Bryn saw the newspaper and the damage her sister's affair had caused, she tried to set things right and explain what she knew. Over the next hour, she told me a story that Jen had shared with her during her visit last week. Bryn explained that Jen was ending it today and went to his house to tell him it was a big mistake and to never talk to her again. Jason, she was so upset when she realized what she had done. When you asked her about her screaming Brian's name, it brought her back to reality, and she knew she had to make things right. You may not believe me, but she was going to tell you everything tonight, after she told Brian it was all over. As you know, things didn't go as planned, and she's heartbroken about it all. She spent hours telling me how much she loved you and how much you mean to her, and I consoled her all week. She thought that by confessing and asking for forgiveness, you might understand and not kick her out. You know me, and I'm not hiding anything. We had a tense conversation, and I made her see how much damage her stupidity had already caused. She's sorry. She regrets her actions and needs you to forgive her. I'll take her home and give you some time to think about it. I know you, Jason. You are a good person, and right now, I know that you don't want her to be a part of your life. What she did is unforgivable, but I'm asking the impossible. Please forgive her. She had no love for this guy, and it wasn't planned. She knows it was stupid and wrong, and you should know that she never meant to hurt you. This will kill her, and I beg you to try to fix this before you kick her to the curb. I won't blame you if you do. Heck, that's exactly what I did to my husband when he cheated on me, but he didn't have the love that my sister has for you. Please just think before you do anything. We sat and talked about life, about old times, about children, about her life, and finished a bottle of good whiskey. For the first time in weeks, I felt almost normal and was happy that she spent time with me that night. It helped me take my mind off my problems for a short time. After hearing about their mom, my children, Mark and Connie, video called me that evening and tried to convince me to take my mom back and forgive her and that we loved each other. I listened to them, but told them about my plan for separation and time to heal. After this time, I would consider our options, including divorce. Taking her back could be on new terms, which she might not like. I explained that I would have already started getting a divorce if everyone hadn't asked me to wait. The next day, both Mark and Connie were devastated when they saw the photos in the national newspaper. USA. Today picked up the article as an interesting story. When they saw their mother in that photograph, lying in blood beneath her lover, they began to understand somewhat of the pain and humiliation I had to face. Yes, Kirby captured a good story and award-winning photography, gained national recognition, and, as a byproduct, destroyed my privacy. The next day, I received calls from friends, family, and reporters. Everyone wanted to know about the affair as soon as her name was revealed in the subsequent storyline. Taking a week off from work, I turned off my phone to avoid calls. Later that day, I got a new phone and number for personal use. Bryn took her home the next morning and told her I needed some time alone to figure out their current situation. As I predicted about Jen's mental abilities, my discovery of her affair, Brian's murder, and being kicked out of our home sent her into depression. Bryn didn't dare tell Jennifer that the photos were in the newspaper because she knew it would drive her crazy. She called and texted me every day, and I never answered. I told Bryn that I needed time to come to terms with the situation and find a solution for all of us, and Jen stopped calling because I had no intention of talking to her. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks passed, and I still couldn't talk to her. I was too emotional and angry about what she made me do. During this time, the police were in hot pursuit as I became the main suspect. They searched my house, talked to my neighbors and colleagues, checked my alibi, and brought me in for questioning several times. My lawyer was helpful, but that didn't stop them. To my horror, I was now the talk of the town, all because of my cheating wife. Sergeant Smith, the lead detective on the case, was sure that I was the killer because the only other suspect was Maria's husband, who was out of town and did not know that he also had an adulterous wife. Smith was now looking into my background and called me in for some further questioning. Mr. Bragg, I see that you spent several years in the Marines and have an honorable discharge, but no other service record. Could you tell me what your role was in the Marine Corps? I'm sorry, but this information is classified. This angered Smith. I know this, Bragg. I've been trying to open files for the last week. This is top secret material, and no one will give me any information. I was hoping you could fill in the blanks. Well, I'm sorry, but I signed several high-level non-disclosure agreements that will get me in big trouble if I talk about them. National security and all that, I said with a grin. Bragg, I'll be honest with you here. I think you knew your wife was having an affair, and I think you used your service skills to kill Brian Simmons. The bullet used to kill Brian Simmons was the type of ammunition used by the military. I was told that it was usually used by snipers. Do you know anything about this? I can't say, Sergeant. It's a shame I can't help you, and I wish you luck in finding his killer. Every meeting went something like this, and my lawyer advised me to cooperate, but to offer as little as possible, giving only short answers. There were several similar meetings and many requests to open my file, but to no avail. I was protected, and unless Smith was acting on something more than his intuition, no case was brought against me. I agreed to talk to Jen 2.5 weeks later after several calls from Bryn begging me to talk to my wife. Bryn explained that all she had done was sit in her room and cry since she got there. She needed help, and maybe talking to me could help. One evening I gave in and started talking. When she handed the phone to Jen, I had a hard time recognizing her voice. Her voice sounded so weak and distant, and for a second I was worried about her. "Jason, could you please let me home? I miss you so much, and I need you to forgive me. Please." Hearing her voice, I got angry again and mistakenly attacked her. "No, not yet. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but because of your affair with Brian, I'm now the prime suspect in his murder. So, not only have you made me your cuckold, but you've also made me the prime suspect in a murder investigation. And now that everyone knows that you were in the photographs, reporters, relatives, and friends are calling me. My life has now become a living hell, and you coming home now would not be good for any of us. You should wait until things calm down. Jen, I can't believe you ruined our marriage, destroyed my love for you, and ruined my life. I hope Brian was worth it." "What photos?" she asked in surprise. "You do not know? Crime scene photos of you and your lover have been all over the newspapers for the past 2 weeks. I'm guessing Bryn didn't show them to you. Well, you're famous now, Jen. Congratulations. They call you the Scarlet Traitor because in the pictures, you were covered in his blood." I sighed, and then Bryn grabbed the phone and asked me what I said, because Jen just collapsed on the couch. I told her about the investigation, along with the photographs in the newspaper, and that now was not the right time to return home. Later that day, when the kids found out what I told their mother and her condition, they called me and told me to stop being an asshole and let Mom come home. They told me I was being childish, that I should grow up and forgive their mother. I told them I would think about it and call them in a day or two after I had calmed down. Apparently, having heard my words, as well as the fact that the whole world knew about her affair, she ran to her room in tears. According to Bryn, after our conversation, her world collapsed, and she did not know how to make everything right again. I didn't sleep much that night and felt guilty about my phone call and what I said to Jen. She was the mother of my children and my wife for 21 years, and I should have been more considerate even though she didn't deserve it. The next day. Early the next morning, I was awakened by a frantic phone call from Bryn. "Jason, you have to come here quickly. Jen is in the hospital in critical condition. Last night after your call, she went into her bedroom and cried until I thought she had fallen asleep. But what I didn't know was that she had swallowed my entire bottle of sleeping pills. I just found it this morning. She's barely alive, and they're not sure she'll make it. For the second time in 2 weeks, I drove like crazy to visit my wife in the hospital. But this time, I felt responsible. I believed that my meanness contributed to her condition and actions. When I ran into her room, the doctor told me that everything looked bad and she could leave us at any moment. I lay down next to her and kissed her on the lips as tears flowed from my eyes. This stupid woman pushed me to do things that forced her to commit suicide. I kissed her and whispered in her ear that I loved her and asked her not to leave us. I was a broken person, crying openly and in bad shape. The guilt and shame I felt was overwhelming, and when the priest came in to administer the last rites, I broke down and sobbed uncontrollably. After the anointing, Father O'Brien took me by the hand and led me into the chapel. He offered to pray with me and ask God for a miracle. I had to tell him and confessed how I caused her suicide and how I couldn't come to terms with being so cruel. I told him everything, and he hugged me while I cried. "Son, God forgives us all. He's already forgiven Jennifer, and he's forgiven you, but you need to forgive Jennifer and yourself before you can continue. Before she leaves, you need to come back to her and tell her that you forgive her. Let her know that it is okay to leave, and we all love her and forgive her for all her sins. She needs you now more than ever, Go to her. I found myself running down the hall towards her room, trying to get there before she passed by. When I entered the room, the nurses looked grim and said it wouldn't be long as her heart was failing and her breathing was becoming shallow. In the blink of an eye, I walked past everyone in tears, climbed onto the bed, grabbed the only woman I had ever loved, and held her tightly to me. My children, the doctor and nurses, and Father O'Brien watched as I spoke into Jen's ear. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as they heard me pour out my soul to this beautiful dying woman. Jennifer, I forgive you, baby, and I'm so sorry. We all forgive you and we love you so much. If you leave us, we will understand, but I don't want you to leave. I want you to come back to me. I forgive you, baby, it's okay. Please come back to me. I sobbed in her face and prayed for a miracle. After I said those words, an alarm sounded on the monitor because her heart stopped beating. They brought a defibrillator and pushed me out of the room. Father O'Brien walked me to the chapel. We sat quietly and prayed for what seemed like hours. Since I began serving, I have turned to God daily and thanked Him for taking care of me and my family. That day I begged Him for a miracle and that I would forgive her unconditionally if He would please return her to me. I continued to cry and looked into Father O'Brien's eyes. I told her, Father, I forgave her, told her we loved her and begged her to forgive me. I've never been a person who cries, but I couldn't stop because the hurt was too painful. My whole world had ended, and now I blamed myself for everything. Father O'Brien sat quietly, listened to my chatter, and continued to pray. About 20 minutes later, the door to the chapel suddenly swung open. Bryn, Connie, and Mark stood there and shouted at me, "Dad, where have you been? She woke up! Mom woke up! She woke up! She woke up! They returned it to us!" I ran down the hallway faster than ever before, and everyone tried to keep up. When I entered the room, I saw the miracle I had been praying for. I fell to my knees when I saw Jennifer lying there with her eyes open. When she saw me, she extended her hand, and I saw tears rolling from her eyes. I approached her while the doctors continued to monitor the situation. The doctor later told us that he had never seen anything like it before. Jen had been dead for at least 6 minutes when the heart monitor suddenly came to life. He said it was a miracle and something for medical books. I leaned closer as she spoke in a low voice. "Did I dream, or did I actually hear you say, 'You forgive me'? Did you hear me?" "Yeah, baby. I'm sorry I ruined everything so much. Forget it. It's all behind us. We need to cure you and bring you home." "Can I go home?" she asked with a surprised look, still crying. "Of course. Home is not home without you, baby." After recovering and spending a week in the hospital's psychiatric ward, Jen returned home and became her old self again. She took time off from work and spent time at home, seeing Claudia, his therapist, twice a week alone and once a week together for the next 6 months. Claudia was able to help Jen regain her confidence and understand what made her succumb to Brian's seduction. Jen was misled about Brian's sphere of influence and his authority. With the help of some hypnotherapy, she remembered that this was how her father had treated her mother before he abandoned them when she was only 12 years old. Somehow, these memories made her realize that her father's behavior had pushed her to seduce Brian. In essence, Jen had serious daddy issues that are easy prey for predators like Brian. Thanks to Claudia for helping her understand these feelings and how to deal with them in the future. Couples activities brought them back together, and they came up with solutions to make sure something like this didn't happen again. There would be much closer communication between them. No lies and deceit would be tolerated, and Jen would have a lot of work to do to return to the level of trust she once enjoyed. She was willing to do whatever it took to save her marriage and worked hard every day to get him back. Jason and Jen moved shortly after the incident to avoid the scrutiny of city residents. Jen was now something of a celebrity, but not in a good way. They decided to move closer to her sister and start a new life with new friends. True to his word, Jason did forgive her and never brought up the incident again after their therapy sessions ended. They sold their house, moved closer to Brina, and began attending Father O'Brien's church. Jason's prayers were answered, and the only woman he had ever loved returned to him. He knew it was a miracle, and thanked God every day. Jason and Jen became active members of the church and felt they needed to repay all their blessings, and they were truly blessed. Of course, the children forgave their mother and were there to support. All their unconditional love helped Jen realize how lucky she was and how close she came to losing everything, including her life. Jason was happy again, and all was right with the world. Brian's murder remains a cold case file. Sergeant Smith continued to work on this until the day he retired 12 years later. He always believed that Jason was the shooter. The killer was never found. Subscribe